Hello, I'm Laurel Ruma with MIT Technology Review. Welcome to Retail Leadership Outlook, accelerating personalization and innovation at scale. This discussion is presented by MIT Technology Review in association with Oracle and Deloitte. In this conversation, we'll be discussing opportunities in the retail industry, exploring trends in artificial intelligence, and getting a better sense of how online and physical retail experiences are converging. This session is a continuation of research published by MIT Technology Review Insights. The report is called Accelerating Retail Personalization at Scale and was produced in association with Oracle and Deloitte. Joining me today from Deloitte Consulting, we have Danny Edsel, Principal and Global Grocery Leader. And from Oracle Retail is Jeff Warren, Vice President of Retail Global Sales. Welcome, and thank you both for being here today.
Hi, Laurel. Thanks for having us. It's a lot of fun.
Laurel, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity. Looking forward to the conversation.
All right, great. Let's start. So the industry has been moving toward a more closely blended mix of online and in-person shopping for some time. So let's start by providing some context about what's happening now. I'll ask you to start, Jeff. What's changing that makes it possible to imagine more personalized experiences in retail, particularly at scale?
Well, Laurel, thanks for the question. So certainly, as you mentioned, the industry has been moving towards omni-channel, whether it's converged commerce, whatever the term that we'd like to put on it. The industry has been moving to consumer journeys that blend both a digital and a physical aspect for well over a decade. That's not new. Certainly what's happened is the acceleration of that. And we can certainly look to the pandemic in 2020 in terms of driving more and more of those interactions between a retailer and their consumers to a digital, some aspect of a digital, a digital interaction. And as that has progressed, the key word within the industry has always historically been transactions. We looked at transaction count, we looked at foot traffic, but most of the transactions and foot traffic and the things that were taking place in the store historically were anonymous. Obviously now, as we move to more and more digital interactions, and interaction is really the key word, more and more of that interaction that's taking place between a retailer and their consumer is a known interaction. And ultimately, the expectation that goes along with a known interaction on the part of the consumer raises the bar on the expectation for the retailer, which is that not only, if I'm consenting and if I'm sharing information and engaging with you digitally, I'm expecting that you're providing a more personalized experience that I get not only on the digital platform, I'm expecting that personalized experience to carry over as I start to engage with you in the physical world. And so we've seen, just this massive shift in the percentage of sales, across, multiple different segments, whether it's grocery, whether it's luxury, hard lines, soft lines. We've seen a massive shift in terms of the number of interactions that are taking place, the amount of data that retailers are being able to collect as a result of those interactions, and the consumer expecting better outcomes and a better experience as a result of having that information and being able to tailor outcomes and tailor an experience that's more relevant and appropriate for them.
That's really interesting, that shift from transactions to known interactions. So, Danny, retailers have been collecting helpful data about their customers, but have had a hard time actually using it. And consumers have been able to collect and use information more than ever now. So, you could say that there's actually two sides of that coin. What does that actually mean for retailers?
Yeah, I mean, the retailers have been on a journey, over the last 30 years as that data has become more and more available and more real time. And it started out, very simply in that we could target our kind of communications and marketing, if you like, to individuals. based on what they'd bought in the past, and make them aware of new offers and new prices, etc. Increasingly, that data's got more and more rich, more and more immediate, and more useful. And retailers have been on a journey to try and improve and upgrade the processes of planning, demand planning, merchandising, space planning, pricing, assortment, if you like, to make best use of that data. And if you think about it, most merchandising processes, most retail processes have been very much product and location centric in the past. It's been all about what products should we put on what shelves in what stores at what time, and kind of selling to an unannounced and masked customer. As we've moved more and more into digital, as Jeff has said, we've had a richer understanding of who those customers are, where they shop, what channel they like to shop, and what their preferences are. And we've been slowly evolving our processes to turn them on the side, if you like, and make them customer centric. Put customer first in that equation, as opposed to product and location first. That's really easy to say. It's really hard to do, partly because a retailer might, a grocery chain, for instance, might have 60,000 products. They might have 3,000 stores, which is a lot of data and a lot of decision making. But they may have 60 million customers. So if I start with customer first, it really changes the nature and the scale of the challenge. And what it means is less and less of those processes can be manual processes. Less and less of them can be done, to be frank, with a spreadsheet and a retailer's intuition. And more of them have to be, automated, systematized and repeatable. And that's why you see the need for increased technology, and you see the move to cloud and cloud scale computing. And then one last comment there. It's no longer good enough for us to to actually have human beings actually operating that data at that scale. We have to increasingly, trust the computer to do it based on the policies, parameters, and outcomes that we're trying to, to try and engender. And that puts even more pressure on people like Jeff to provide the underlying compute platforms that really enable us to do that. And we're entering a new era where AI is promises to make that world even easier and even more empowering for us as retailers.
So speaking of computing, why don't we take a minute to go through the underlying technologies that the industry actually relies on? Jeff, you've worked with retailers all over the world on various infrastructure projects. So how will increasingly intelligent core industries such as demand planning come into play?
So that's a great question, Laurel. So, and certainly as we're seeing the change in expectations on consumer behavior, it's driving, as Danny alluded to, the amount of data that's required by a retailer in order to be able to manage and plan their business is going up exponentially, because retail, as Danny alluded to, used to be as simple as plan, buy, move, sell, fulfill. So in terms of thinking about product and location, I had an interesting conversation with with the head of supply chain for a large North American retailer. Their consumer and their customer used to be the locations on which they were fulfilling essentially product and putting to a location. They've made a complete shift in that they're thinking about their customer now, not as the location, but as the persona of the individuals and the individuals that are passing through that location, in terms of how they need to think about setting up and organizing their supply chain, and how they think about allocating and replenishing inventory. So we're seeing this change in that understanding that as we think about understanding demand, and as we think about creating a plan, the plan in the past used to be, okay, how much do I want to sell? How much do I want to sell at this location? What revenue by by category, and you would kind of break that down, to the individual pieces and parts. What's happened now is what kinds of customers and which customers are going to be interacting and engaging with my brand in this particular location, and how do I need to strategically place inventory to best fulfill that demand, both in terms of what is going to interact with my brand as part of the physical interaction, but what demand is going to be influenced or need to be fulfilled through a digital interaction at that fulfillment point. And so ultimately, as you think about how that changes, and as we think about these consumer journeys, too often I spend time with retailers asking me, well, how can I use my stores as fulfillment points? Well, in order to be able to use a store as a fulfillment point, that process has to extend all the way back into the planning process. And what that's causing the retail industry to go through is the traditional silos and the traditional organizational structure that we would have in retailers, 10, 15 years ago, where you'd have a store operations team, you'd have your merchandise, you'd have your merchants, you'd have your allocators, you'd have your planning organization, and they would optimize, for their individual KPIs. But the individual KPI wasn't, for any one of those organizations, wasn't about improving the overall customer experience. We're seeing retailers now more and more frequently change how they're organized, and putting together these cross-functional teams to optimize around the consumer experience. The challenge that creates is that the data and the information that they need and the processes that Danny alluded to were historically tied up in silos with either legacy homegrown systems, package systems that were all running in an on-premise manner, where the data was in silos, and the only place that data was brought together was typically in something that was known as a data lake, a data warehouse. And I use the expression, a retailer could tell you everything about a customer that was in their store yesterday, but nothing about what they needed to do for the customer that was in the store at that moment. And so the challenge for retailers is being able to take this data, pull it out of those data silos, and as they think about reorganizing their business and restructuring how they actually deliver value and outcomes to their consumers in the moment, getting that information accessible and being able to used across different disciplines ultimately for the best possible outcome. And that's really where we're seeing the transition from on-premise, mainframe-based systems to moving more and more of that information into the cloud, where it's accessible and can be leveraged across a number of different disciplines and processes, is really kind of the strategy. It's the technology strategy that is being leveraged in order to be able to address the business strategy and the change in business that's occurring within the industry.
That is quite complex. Danny, what other trends do you see playing out in this area?
Well, first I want to I just kind of back up what Jeff said. I think that complex change is being played out, and the retailers that are getting it right are winning. And one of the challenges that all retailers had over the last 5 years is the growth in the expectation around omni-channel has kind of exceeded our capacity to meet the needs in an efficient and effective way. So what you find is most retailers have managed to move to either home delivery or curbside pickup or in-store pickup. But they haven't necessarily managed to do it in a very profitable way. And they haven't managed to do it because they haven't been able to align the planning processes to be truly omni-channel. So they've kind of muscled through by kind of throwing inventory at all channels, and in effect having inventory in at least 3 different locations where it didn't used to exist. And that is, basically bleeding away profit from already a very low margin business, right? So that need to optimize the planning process around a customer and channel is, that's not just a whim. That's a kind of existential need in order to stay in business profitably. And you find that the businesses that haven't managed it may not actually be here today, right? So that's the first thing. And there's an old saying that my last best experience is my new expectation. and we all have that as customers, right? If somebody delights me by having that product when I need it, how I need it, where I need it, they basically win my business and win my loyalty, right? So that is changing. The other thing I'll say is our level of comfort with the amount of data that we're willing to share in order to get a personalized experience is growing by the day, and certainly by the generation, right? Looking at the three of us, I guess we're all probably Gen Xers, there or thereabouts. Millennials and then Gen Z are incredibly more open and comfortable with what they share and how they share, but they're also even more picky about the experiences they get when they share that information, that data, right? So, you're seeing the transformation of the customer experience, being informed by that. So, for instance, there are multiple stores now in airports and grocery stores where we've removed the checkout entirely, and the data that we used to rely on for demand planning, which was the barcode scan, if you like, at the front of the store, has been replaced by machine vision and cameras, and a personalized digital experience that basically tracks us as we walk around the store, figures out what we put in our basket or in our pocket or in our own bag, and without stopping at a checkout to pay, we just walk out of the door, and the receipt just appears magically on our phone, on our digital account. That was kind of unheard of a few years ago. It's technology that's live and at scale and being used in real life across lots of retailers. What that does is, though, that changes even more the amount of data and the amount of personalization and the amount of insight that we get into our customers' preferences. And that puts even more of an opportunity back, into the planning and demand side to be able to fulfill more effectively, right, and really meet those consumer needs. So, I'd say the trend's been moving in one direction for a long time. It's about to even accelerate even more, which means that need for the single cloud-based kind of real-time data-driven platform that Jeff's talking about is even more prevalent today. And to be frank, human beings can't cope with decision making at that scale. So we have to overlay that with some artificial intelligence, and the people in that process have to be setting policies and setting parameters for business, not having their hands on the controls. It's a bit, we're kind of moving to the self-driving car kind of era, where you just tell the car, where do I want to go, and it figures out the rest. And so that's the other burden back on the solution providers, is to provide us with that level of kind of abstraction, if you like, so we can tell the system what we want to achieve, and the system can go and figure out how to set all the dials and knobs and whistles to make it work, right?
Yeah, and to do that quickly and easily, and like you said, in real time. So, Jeff,
Right.
Let's talk about this retail agility. Could you talk a little bit more about this idea and what this means in this context?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, as Danny talked about, with the rise in the amount of data that's actually being produced in order to produce, essentially similar outcomes. The challenge that retailers have is we look at how it's being done today, in many cases. So uh, the way retail has historically operated, if you have a problem, what do? You throw inventory at it. To Danny's point. So what's the next thing you do? You throw labor at it. So in terms of whether it's in store, or gearing up, preseason, or in season, in order to be able to kind of muscle your way through. So Deloitte actually presented at our conference last week, some fascinating stats. So when you look at the way we've answered those questions in the past, well, you throw inventory at it. Well, what happens when supply chain costs have gone up astronomically over the last decade? So what happens when your labor costs have gone up significantly over the last 5 years? What happens when you have a labor shortage and you're unable to get the amount of labor that you need in order to be able to, to kind of muscle your way through? In talking with some retailers in North America, there's this concept of vacancy rates now that they're dealing with in their stores, in that they're not able to actually fully staff their store to how they would ideally want to staff that location. And so they're dealing with vacancy and trying to figure out how they can get through, kind of on I'll call it a skeleton crew in terms of in terms of being able to operate that location. So to
Hmm.
Danny's point, the only way you can actually solve these problems is to start to shift away from having your team members and your corporate members search for the work that they need to do, and have systems that actually start to help you manage your business by exception. And so that, and as we've been thinking about that problem now for the last decade, that, the key really is, how do we have the system identify and, to Danny's point, leverage AI to be able to generate the outcomes that are needed for 80 to 90% of your business, but then have the system surface those exceptions, give a user, whether that user's in a store or whether that user's a corporate allocator, whether that user's a planner, give the user the ability to visualize the potential different paths that they could take, what options that might include, potential outcomes as a result of making those choices, and then allow those end users and employees within the retailer to be more efficient, to be able to produce those outcomes. And ultimately, that is the only way, as we think about the rising labor costs, the labor shortages, and the cost of a mistake, and the cost of actually sending inventory to the wrong place at the wrong time, and the increased cost that's now associated with that because of the increased cost of the supply chain and the labor associated with it. The only way that you can ultimately get to those outcomes is to have the systems produce better answers and a better starting point, and to focus your team members on dealing with the exceptions and the things that ultimately are going to drive the most value for your business.
Hmm. Yeah, that is certainly complex, especially when you're talking about employee experience as well as trying to drive customer experience. So that kind of agility has certainly been put to the test as digital and physical shopping experiences continue to be intertwined, and you gave us some really great examples of that. So these omni-channel touch points are key to delivering personalized experiences and definitely at scale, as you mentioned. So Danny, could you give us an example of how this is actually happening already?
Yeah, I'll give you an example very close to my own heart. I've got a 16-year-old daughter, and I've been helping her, shop for school supplies, etc. Right, and that's a great example of where the old methodology of kind of like being product and location centric really lets you down. What do you do if you're product and location centric? You put in a standard kind of assortment of back to school supplies into every store, and then you kind of hope that you sell out at the end of the season because the demand drops dramatically, right? High risk, high odds and high kind of reward for the retailer if they get it right. And lots of costs if you get it wrong. You're stuck with boxes and boxes and boxes of unused stationery, right? So so product and location would say, let's get the assortment right, let's put it out into all the stores, and let's advertise it well and make sure that people can know it's there, and hopefully they'll sell out. Here's the trouble, though. Every school district, every school within every school district has a slightly different list of the supplies and the needs. And then every parent and every child has different preferences as well, and then has different budgets. And so if you take the product and location way of doing things, you are almost definitely going to end up disappointing a whole bunch of customers and hurting their loyalty. And also being stuck with a whole bunch of inventory that you really didn't want at the end of that event. So what do you do better? Well, you try and figure out by store, by location, what the school districts are, what their minimum supply list is, how many kids they have in each school that shop your particular store, and you try and tailor your assortments down to a specific, kit list, if you like, or set of kits within each store, and then you cast the volume by ideally the number of customers you think go to those schools and will go online. And then what you have to do is figure out, I'm gonna get that wrong. How do I actually use the online channel to be able to make up for the fact that I'm going to get that wrong? And so to let me kind of reallocate the excess, if you like, across online. And if you do that really well, you end up with full baskets, happy kids, and happy moms and dads, and a successful school year, right? If you do it badly, you end up with mountains and mountains of unused paper and the latest Power Rangers lunch boxes that you can't ever sell because nobody likes Power Rangers anymore, right? So that's just one example of where, hopefully very tangible, of where you have to get as close as you possibly can to the customer in the planning process to be successful. And if you don't, it costs you an awful lot of money.
That's a good example. Jeff, do you have another one you could add to this conversation?
Absolutely. So first of all, I've got my kids are a little bit older, so that my back to school shopping experience is a little different than Danny. But we have 3 dogs in our house, and so for any of you who are dog lovers, that going to the pet, basically your local pet store, and pet food. There's an opportunity to spend on them like they are your children, and so we've been working with a number of retailers in that segment, and one of the really interesting things, obviously, and this is not new, is that a transaction that involves that's anonymous has a certain value. A transaction that is known, where it's a known interaction, has a higher value. A transaction that is part of someone that is part of your loyalty program has the highest value. And certainly transactions that are loyalty, that start on a digital platform, and that also involve, from a physical standpoint, have the highest potential value in terms of when you look at the basket size. And so as we started to sit down to say, okay, how can not only we help improve the overall engagement and interaction between that retailer and their consumers, but drive up the basket size. We started working with them on a strategy, as part of their loyalty program, and combining that with the physical interactions that were taking place in the store, to say, okay, as part of their their loyalty program and as part of their app, we're going to be able to start to track and capture information about them from a beacon standpoint even before they come into the store. And so the interaction and the engagement, and ultimately the notification that's sent to the associate, allows us to then now be able to greet them more personally. We have context and we have information about their pets' names, their pets' birthdays. Also, again, it's constantly back to school when I'm shopping, for our pets. But being able to enable the associate to be able to have that context and that information in the moment, to be able to better serve their customers, really had a tangible impact on driving up not only the known interactions into more loyalty type interactions, but to increase the value that was going into that basket. And so, again, that's just one example. There's numerous others where changing the nature of that interaction becomes critical in terms of improving the outcomes for both the consumer as well as for the retailer.
Yeah, and those are 2 great examples. So, Danny and Jeff, thank you very much. This has been a great conversation. For our closing remarks, I'd like to invite both of you just to share your final thoughts and how executives can take action on some of these really important ideas you've given us today.
I'll go first if that's okay. Yeah, I mean, I think most of our clients, most of our executives, kind of have been living this journey alongside us, for the last 20 or 30 years. You don't get into those positions unless you're very knowledgeable and understanding. I guess the critical point I think we're trying to make is the last few years has accelerated that rate of change, but also given us an opportunity, right, where the technology and capacity of that technology was holding us back. In the past, the move to cloud and the scalability that cloud can bring and the immediacy that cloud can bring, is really and the invention and the maturing of AI has really changed the game. And technology is one of the unlocks, but the people and process change that goes alongside that, and the change of kind of a reconfiguring of our kind of business model is the other kind of unlocking factor, if you like. If we get those three things together, right, and in synergy and in sync and in harmony, and we are relentlessly focused on improving the customer experience, that's a winning formula, and we can do better. I think if we get any one of those out of sync, it's really hard to be successful. So, sounds like motherhood and apple pie, but it's exciting, a very exciting adventure, and I think it's probably the most exciting time to have been in retail for the last 30 years. So the next 5 is going to be even more exciting.
Yeah, and I would absolutely echo those sentiments that that Danny just shared, which is, I get asked a lot by retail executives, how can AI help my business? You know, and my answer is AI is not a concept that stands alone. AI needs to be embedded in the process change and the business change and the organizational change that you think about in terms of being able to deliver better outcomes to your business. So, to have, AI as something that is on the side, being executed by data scientists and trying to find a way to fit that back in, you really have to go back and start with the change and process and understand how that's going to impact your business, how you're going to reorient your business around those consumer journeys and those consumer outcomes. And then AI and cloud are part of the strategy to be able to help execute, but it's not the answer. It's the tool that allows you to be able to address that fundamental problem.
Well, Danny and Jeff, thank you so much for being here with us today. I really appreciate it.
Laurel, thank you for the opportunity. It's been a fun morning, and hope to do it again soon.
Echo those sentiments, Laurel. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with the community and appreciate everyone's participation. Thank you.
Well, I'd also like to thank our audience for being with us today. I hope you found this conversation as insightful as I have. Thank you all for joining us today for this Retail Leadership Outlook on accelerating personalization and innovation at scale.